Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, May 4th, 2022, and may the 4th be with you. Today we're going to be answering three questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last few days. And in the next half hour or so, we'll take a look at some of the key news stories that have led to these questions being raised today, and hopefully provide our view on how these topics might impact what you do in international education. And as we do each week, we take the time to spend with you on these news stories, going in depth into them. We take our news stories from our newsletter, all the SMIE news fit to share. Comes out Mondays, 9 a.m. Eastern, direct to your inbox. And also, if you subscribe on LinkedIn, you get it a half hour early on Monday morning. I'm dropping some links into the chat so that you have those for future reference. First is the link to our website, smieconsulting.org/subscribe. Then a link to the most recent edition of the newsletter that you can subscribe to through our website. And then the third is the LinkedIn version of that you're welcome to subscribe to as well. We've got nearly 600 subscribers on the LinkedIn newsletter in the last 4 weeks, and really encouraged by how much more broadly that message is getting out to the international education community. So really glad that you're with us today. It's an important time in the lead up. We all are getting ready in international education for what's coming up later this month in Denver with the return of in-person NAFSA. And after 3 years, it's been since May of 2019 since NAFSA's been in person. It's going to be great to be back together with thousands of international educators from around the world. And we're looking forward to what's to come. And I'm sure everybody's inbox is just flooded with requests from vendors and other service providers, potential university partners that you're looking to connect with, or they're looking to connect with you to potentially begin a relationship or enhance an existing one. So hope that the next few weeks leading up to NAFSA go well for you, and that the conversations you're able to have allow you to spend your time as wisely as possible in that very busy week of NAFSA. So let's get right into our questions. First question of the day: are you asking the right questions in your strategic marketing? And this is a question I know with many of the universities that I consult with, comes out of really identifying what's the goal here. Do you want more international students on campus? Great. Okay. Do you want more diverse countries from where international students should come from? Okay, that's a different question. Who are you targeting with your messaging? Those types of things. So every institution that I've had the pleasure of consulting with over the years, that's been the important starting point. But what I've seen happen, the reality is, very few institutions spend the time before they bring in consultants to really think about what their identity is, what they want to be. And it's really kind of the questions that get asked, follow-up questions after I ask those initial questions are ones that you would think would be ones that would be already part of what that institution's done. The answer to those would have been more readily available, but they aren't in many cases. So what's important is what you have on the institutional level is, if you're going to be outsourcing marketing in any way, is know who you are first. And the folks at INTED, I've long respected what Ben Waxman and his team do there. In terms of the services they provide to individual institutions. They're a much bigger shop than I am here at SMIE Consulting, and they do some fantastic data work that is really impressive in terms of digging in and really customizing their work with individual institutions, and not just regurgitating the same plan that a provider might have used with a different institution, just regurgitating, changing the names, and thinking that's going to be get them through the door and get their products bought by the institutions. So really, they do take the time to get to know their clients, and they ask the questions. They had a recent post, and that's what's kind of led to this question today about, are you asking the right marketing questions, strategic marketing questions before you outsource? But these are also good questions to hopefully know the answers to if you're doing things internally and scaling up and going in some new directions. You want to know who you are and what your plans are, what your identity is really, and what that boils down to for purposes of this discussion here, in terms of as institutions, what are you actually using as the motivating answers to questions, or asking the right questions. Untitled team boils it down to three key questions: to whom do we market, whom do we accept, and how much do we award them? So those are the three essential elements in the admissions funnel at any institution around the world that has gone after domestic students, international students, regardless of where they're from. And what I think the first point is, the first question, and the Untitled team really hones in on this one in their work with individual institutions, is that oftentimes way different vendors come in, different providers, different consultants might come in and just provide kind of a cookie cutter approach to things, when the reality is every institution has a different identity. They may sound similar to other institutions, but the realities of to whom do they market? A further refinement of that question is, to whom should we market? Is probably the additional refinement I would add to that question, because that is not the same for every institution, because depending on your academic profile, depending on the resources you have, depending on your campus-wide plans for international in this particular circumstance. Are you marketing to the right students? And you may have aspirations to get into new markets that you're not currently in, so your messaging will need to be different in those markets where you don't have a brand identity. So knowing those answers to these three questions: to whom do we market, whom do we accept, and how much do we award them? And the second question, to whom do we accept? And that is really, it boils down to what's your admit rate, but it's also who do you want in your class. Obviously, when you market to, to whom you want to market. You have a particular persona or profile of students you might want to accept, but you're not going to know that academically for every student that you might be marketing to. But you can. The next question is, who do you want to admit? If you're in a new market, you have obviously standards internationally that you have that you try and apply evenly to every country. If you're trying to break into a new market, do you perhaps relax a certain standard on test scores? Perhaps if you were still requiring test scores, would you go test optional if there's simply not access in certain markets? If you're not already test optional, and that can impact whom you accept in terms of their qualifications that they might have. In terms of English language proficiency, that's a part of the process for international students. Are you providing a wider range of English proficiency requirements or options for how students can demonstrate proficiency beyond just the standard English proficiency tests like TOEFL, IELTS, PTE, Academic, Duolingo, and others. Those are the ones that everybody knows, but do you have options for alternate ways they can demonstrate proficiency through the secondary education or the college level education they might already have had, if it's been fully in English? How are you documenting that? How are you regulating that in terms of, well, students in Cameroon from the English-speaking part of the country, maybe we should exempt them from having to take a TOEFL, IELTS, or PTE, Academic, or Duolingo. Maybe for students in Nigeria and Ghana, they've been educated in English from earliest days, and if that's their only language and it's been the language of education, do you waive it there? How about India? That's the big one. Do you waive English proficiency for any Indian student? That perhaps a little bit more of a gray area there, but Do you waive it for the education system that they're studying in? Like, for example, if they've been in IGCSEs and A levels, AS levels, A levels, if they've been in IB, do you waive it, waive the English proficiency program requirements? So these are the kinds of questions, if you have answers, that will impact whom you want to accept beyond just an academic profile. So those are the things that you certainly want to consider when you're doing that. I love the way that they lay those out within the INTED framework there in the article that they've presented. They are really asking the kinds of questions, because to whom you market also impacts the competitors, your competitors. Are you trying to compete with certain institutions? Domestically, you might have a certain set of competitors, but internationally, it could be it should and will be a whole different set of institutions that a student that might be applying to you from China or from India might have different institutions in the US, but also different institutions around the world that they may also be applying to at the same time. So knowing what your competitors are doing, not just in the US, but in other countries to attract students is something that you need to be focused on. Whom you accept is as we talked about with English proficiency in other areas. These are the things that you want to keep in mind. And the final question on who gets the scholarships, who do we award money to? It's a huge indicator of where a student goes is where they get funding. Particularly from the non-elite of every country that might be applying to study outside their home country. They're going to be looking for options that help and institutions that will help defray the costs of education, because it is expensive and prohibitively so for most institutions in the U.S. If you are even a public institution, that total cost per year could be $40,000 plus. For out-of-state and international students, that's a lot. And if you don't have, because that could be over a 4-year period, over $200,000 for an undergraduate education. And if you're not able to defray that even a little bit, you become much less attractive for the middle-class family from India, from China, that can say that they've got a scholarship somewhere else that can help cut their costs by 15-20% or more. If you can't do that, then that's you by definition will be limiting who you can attract to your institution, and makes it just another strike against you in terms of trying to compete against other U.S. schools or institutions in other countries where their total cost is far lower than yours would be at your institution. So those things are really the core questions. I think they're spot on at INTED in terms of nailing that down. And I think that it's really important for institutions that are about to really go down the strategic planning route on how you're going to market, who you're going to market to, what are you going to, how much you're going to pay for. How much you're going to attract, be able to commit to funding students. It's a real interesting decision there. So, in terms of for the person on LinkedIn who's just commented, I can't see my video. I apologize for that. But if you go to my Twitter feed for SMIE Consulting on Twitter/SMIE Consulting, you should be able to find that link there. Also on our Facebook page for SMIE Consulting, this is going live there as well. Sometimes LinkedIn makes it a little difficult, so I'm sorry it's not showing, the video's not showing for you there. At least you're hearing me, so hopefully that works. But we'll move on to our second question today, and that is why are China and India having relationship problems? We've had some news stories recently over the last few months, going back to last year when India was banning all sorts of Chinese apps, to not allowing them to be downloaded by people in India. We really see we saw a border dispute that led to the deaths of soldiers on both sides last year as well, and that's something that always inflames tensions. What we have seen in relation to India and China is that it seems to be a lot of recently students. We talked about last week how students are being used as kind of pawns in political power plays between the two countries. In addition to all those apps that India has banned in China, you have had the situation for the last 2 years, still more than 2 years now, where Indian students that had been studying in China, who weren't able to get back in before the borders closed, have not been able to return to China to finish their programs. I've been doing everything online from mobile devices for the last 2 years. And they're fed up and they want to get back in. China's been slow to reopen and frankly has done a lot of damage to their reputation internationally, even though they might have handled the pandemic very well in the early days. What they've been doing lately is frankly more damaging than anything they've done related to the pandemic in the last 2 years. The lockdowns that have been going on in Shanghai for over 5 weeks now are just devastating. There are Americans and other Western teachers at international schools that have had to leave the country, have been evacuated from their countries to other Southeast Asian countries or come back home even. That was happening during the pandemic as well for American educators who are working in China at schools and universities. So China's really the zero COVID policy has negatively impacted them and their reputation. These Indian students who want to get back in aren't able to get back in, and China has refused until recently even admitting that they will have conversations about having students return from India. You've had India kind of threatened last week to revoke tourist visas or business visas or at least tourist visas for any Chinese coming into India, where they would not be allowed in. And that seems to have moved the conversation. We saw a news story early this week that China would consider bringing small groups of Indians back in. But there are 20,000 Indians that have been studying in China and who are not yet being allowed back in. Yet we do have a story in that China is now allowing Sri Lankan students to return, small groups again, nothing significant or all-inclusive yet from any country. You've had stories as well that we're sharing that other students, foreign students that are that have been in China that are trying to leave haven't been allowed out. This has happened to a number of Korean students that were studying at Fudan University, one of the top institutions in the country, and Koreans at other international secondary schools that have not been able to return yet. I mentioned India suspending Chinese tourist visas. That's again the political tit for tat that's going on. So it's really kind of unfortunate that this is all happening as it has over the last few years, last 2 years, and it's been clearly there's some tension between China and India over borders, over economic decisions, over political power plays that India's been trying to. Population-wise, they're fairly close to China, but they're different. They're the world's largest democracy, one of the world's largest youth populations, as opposed to China that's growing very old very rapidly. So there's some definite differences between China and India that are really impacting what's going on. So you have to look at what's happening there in the light of with the pandemic, but also just in the political tension between the two nations, to the most powerful nations in the Brics group: Brazil, Russia, China, India, China, South Africa, excuse me. That group is kind of after the G7, that's the next biggest bloc of countries in the world scene, and we're seeing some of that play out with Ukraine and Russia, as we talked about. But when it comes to international students, you really see some wrangling going on between China and India, the two biggest senders of international students around the world. So got a question here from a LinkedIn user. Which, according to you, would be recruiting more international students, USA or UK, as US is adding on new restrictions to the visa. I don't know if they're adding new restrictions to the visas. I don't know what you're specifically referring to there. If anything, the restrictions have been lifted and still are being made easier for students. We're still in pandemic mode in terms of regulations. In fact, the Department of Homeland Security a couple weeks ago announced that the existing pandemic level policy that allowed students to continue to do all online if they were enrolled pre-pandemic, they can continue their studies all online from within the United States or back home, and also allowed for those that are coming to the U.S., if they're enrolled in at least one in-person class, they can enter the U.S. in F1 status, in visa status. So the rules have actually been kept loose for those students. I think certainly during the pandemic, the UK has come out better in terms of their numbers and not losing ground over the last 2 years in terms of in-country students enrolled, international students enrolled. But volume-wise, the U.S. is still over 1 million students in the United States, international students in the United States. I think the UK just hit 600,000 this past year. So there, in terms of actual volume, the U.S. is still above the UK in that respect. But UK is doing really well. They've gone all in on China, much like the U.S. did 15, 20 years ago. And they're seeing the benefits there. But we'll see. The China market is going to be, for most institutions, is going to be the big determinant one there in terms of who are the big winners, because numbers have been declining from China for the last 6 or 7 years to the U.S. They're still the number one source of students, but India may challenge that in the next 4 or 5 years, where India may go above China if they can, if more Indian undergraduates start coming. Indian graduates have always been coming to the United States in significant numbers, but we could see more undergrad. We have been seeing more Indian undergrads, but I don't think we're getting anywhere near the volume that we had with Chinese undergraduates starting in the mid 2000s. So but your question is a very valid one in terms of shining a light on how competitive the global market is for international students these days. The pie has gotten a lot bigger, and this is one thing I always tell my university clients when we talk about what you need to be focusing on and how you talk about your institution in the global marketplace. Is U.S. back in 2000 had about 30% market share of the globally mobile student market. By 2022, 2021, we're down to 20%. So the U.S. share of the overall international student mobile pie has shrunk, but our numbers have doubled in that time, from over 500,000 to over 1 million currently. So it's a bigger pie, a much bigger pie. There are over 5 million students currently studying outside their home country right now. U.S. has 20% of that pie right now. There have been other players in addition to the UK and Australia, like Canada, that have come onto the scene like gangbusters, as well as China as a destination for international students in the last 5 years, 5 to 10 years. And so you see a much more competitive global marketplace. And going back to that first question, are you asking the right questions in your strategic marketing? Are you asking how you're going to recruit and how are you going to message to students in particular countries, and how do you reflect your values as an institution, but also your country in relation to other countries around the world that are going after likely the same students? So very, very important question that you ask, and one that no real easy answers. We're there are more U.S. institutions that are actively recruiting now than ever before, and certainly more in the U.S. that are recruiting than there are in in Canada, Australia, and the UK combined. So just by sheer volume, we're going to be recruiting more international students. So a little bit of a simplistic answer to your question there. So cover both sides there. And the final question of the day, can international ed and environmental responsibility exist together? And this is going to be a theme we're going to be hearing more of. In fact, today, NAFSA launched its 2-day international or virtual version of the conference that's going to be happening in Denver later this month. But their virtual program had a session this morning. In fact, it might be going on as we're speaking right now. on international ed and sustainability, environmental sustainability. So these are topics that are very much front and center of the issues these days. And we see on two articles that I'll be presenting here. One is from the PI News on international education deeply implicated in the global climate crisis. And for those of you that aren't already subscribed to the Chronicle's Latitudes newsletter, that's Karen Fisher has put out over the last couple of years. One of the most recent editions from last Wednesday. The theme was on international sustainability, on international education and making it more sustainable. There's an accord called the Climate Action Network for International Educators, CANE, the CANE Accord. It's a global grassroots nonprofit organization. It asks signatories to agree to a set of broad principles, and this is from Karen's newsletter. The signatories agree to a broad set of principles for sustainability and climate action and pledge to take a half a dozen steps of their choosing to combat the climate crisis. So it's an interesting take on the concrete steps they can take, like limiting in-person meetings and airline travel, measuring and setting targets for emission reductions within their institution or office, and adding climate literacy modules to study abroad programming. They can also expand international ed opportunities that involve less travel, including virtual exchanges, better integration of global learning into the curriculum, and offering all or part of a degree program to international students in their home countries. So these are things that some of which have grown out of the pandemic, and with everybody being forced to go online, certain countries found out really quickly that doing online is not as easy as they thought it was, certainly when you consider time differences and price differentials that you should and build into those kinds of programs. But the opportunities are growing and interest is growing, not hugely, because some of those initial experiences during the pandemic when everybody was forced to go online weren't the most positive ones. So as those have developed, as newer students come into the pipeline that maybe are more open to that and have had these experiences in secondary school or in undergraduate studies, if they're looking for graduate programs, may be more willing to consider an all online degree or a part online degree. So institutions that are looking at these issues now and are setting up setting up procedures and policies at their institutions that can address these kinds of issues and frankly be more responsible in their travel as institutions. I think from institutions that I'm working with currently, we're looking at ways that we can minimize international travel, and when it is done, it's done for impactful things, truly impactful things, for beyond just MOU signings, but really establishing formalized programs that are going to be really bilaterally quite successful and sustainable, looking into online options, but also looking at recruitment travel, because a number of my colleagues who are road warriors are really, this is probably going to be one of the hardest things that they have to grapple with in their work in international education, and balancing that with environmental sustainability in terms of our impact on the world. All the trips that we take to recruit for 3 weeks to a month in 8-9 different countries, is that still worth it? A pandemic has certainly thrown up a lot of other hurdles to travel internationally, with potential testing and quarantine periods and other factors that may make it less attractive to begin with. But certainly there are some real elements to what we do with recruitment travel that really need to be re-examined in the light of day, in terms of when you do go, is it, as some institutions are looking at doing exclusively, their recruitment travel will not be for lead generation anymore. That they'll do virtual fairs that help fill their pipeline quite successfully over the last 2 years from a wider variety of colleges or countries than they might have normally had ever gotten before. And now their travel focus will be on admitted student events at the tail end of the funnel, or alumni receptions for new students that will be coming in the fall. Those are the kinds of things that I think those that have been more active traveling internationally for recruitment might be forced to consider as new models of how they approach recruitment travel or institutional travel internationally, and also domestically. There's a lot to say for that. Having that personal connection is still going to be important. How you can replicate that virtually, if at all, those are the questions and balancing acts that need to be done in the enrollment process. Are there adequate alternatives that we can be exploring as institutions? So we'll take a look at those. These kinds of questions won't go away. We'll certainly have these again in the coming weeks and months. Certainly appreciate you all being online with us today, and hope that in the coming few days, hopefully we'll get a chance to reconnect at NAFSA in Denver. Looking forward to connecting with many new and old colleagues there. So until next time, wish you the very best, and we'll see you next week.